Another reason why I shouldn't be making any decisions right now is that there's actually a geomagnetic storm. And I started tracking this a little bit after watching the documentary, The Solar Revolution. And I got an app called Solar Alert as well as one called Nature Mood. I kind of like the Nature Mood one. It shows a bunch of different stuff, and I showed a screenshot of it, or a screen video, and I think I showed the upcoming geomagnetic storm. Well, on my phone last night at 8:20, I got an alert from Solar Alert saying there's a G1 geomagnetic storm happening. And I was driving home after sharing my story, and at 10:20, there was a flash of lightning through the whole sky, and it lit the whole sky up, and it scared me. Like, my heart just went like right after. And then I saw 2 more flashes, so 2 hours after I got this alert. Plus, I knew it was coming because of the Nature Mood app. But it was so funny. It's like, wow, this geomagnetic storm really has something to it. There's this lightning, and it's coming from the sun, like it's coming from the cosmos. It's not only an Earth phenomenon. And that just sort of baffles me and blows my mind and expands it beyond the range of Earth even to the sun. And it has expanded to the sun and had insights into the other Earth on the other side of the sun and blah, blah, blah. All these crazy possibilities. But yeah, to see such evidence of that, like the lightning flash right on time with that, was crazy. And so it's probably not a good time to be making these decisions, and it could have been the start of the geomagnetic storm last night that was giving me energy, but it could also be that that's messing up my energy, because this morning I took a screenshot at 9 a.m. and it said, "You might be grumpy, don't blame other people for the bad weather." You know, and this consciousness is affected by the weather of the sun. It's not really surprising to me, but that could be part of what is correlating with this state. So, you know, I might say, well, I can take supplements and fix it, but it could just be that's what's going to happen, partly because of the sun and being sensitive to the sun and sensitive to light. And that relates to how the spire told me there seems to indicate that I'm sensitive to fluorescent light that isn't the sun and natural. So there's a lot to it, and it's not causality, but knowing certain things can help to weather the storms and the geomagnetic storm. And I think it keeps going a little bit until the 12th, and then it looks like it sort of settles down after that. And I made some notes on different astrological phenomenon that are coming up. It seems like there's this thing. There's, you know, an individual brain and consciousness. There's the morphogenetic field, but there's like the whole of human history. There's past lives. There's the family constellation. There's karma. There's destiny. There's fate. There's consciousness. There's a few other ones that I wrote down. I don't have them written here, but on a notepad in my phone. And it's just really fascinating. And when I went to the dentist yesterday, it was interesting. 24 of the 80 minutes, so about 25 or 30% of the time, I was tense. And it was usually, I got the buzzing notification after they were doing some scraping. Like some parts of my teeth that were kind of like yucky, I guess. My teeth aren't too bad though, considering I haven't been to the dentist in like 3 years. That salt toothpaste, I think, really works. And the water pick. And yesterday too, when I was caught in traffic, this Tesla went by the other way, and it had a license plate that said Dream C, like Dream Center. Didn't say Dream Center, but it just made me think, like, there's the Tesla saying Dream Center, like, don't forget the Dream Center. Don't forget, you kind of want a Tesla, not a Volt. So maybe I can wait out for that, hold out for that. You know, it's kind of like that line in the ABBA song, I had a dream, or I have a dream, I think it's called. You can take the future even if you fail. There's a future consciousness that is also now, but with the morphogenetic field the way it is, it's difficult to stay in that. And then that's the whole point. Like, how long can I maintain this? You know, it seems when I've gone into stronger manias, like in the very beginning, it maintained for a month, but then it was like a month of psychosis. So if I can maintain it now for a week and then it drops out and it's like 2 hours of scary stuff in the night, or kind of annoying not being able to sleep, that's not too bad. Especially if today, like, I feel like I can get back to my to-do list. I have some stuff to do, and it's going to continue to be rainy for the next week, so there's no reason why I can't spend time inside and work on it, in hopes that in a week when it starts to get nice, I will do the things that I put money towards, like tennis and whatever else. And my brain twin and I did a bit of an experiment. This could be really important. We were talking on April 2nd, and he was not doing the greatest, like down, had no energy, kind of just laying in bed, and that was going on for months. So through discussion and dialogue, we decided that I would send him some links and resources and ideas and things and just whatever. And then we talked a week later, and he's like, oh yeah, I've been up and I started volunteering at this place I used to volunteer at, and I started doing green smoothies because you sent me something about green smoothies, and I've lost 2 pounds when nothing else has made it budge since in a year. So that's given me some hope, and I'm starting to work out in a different way because you sent me something about that. And so it was like, wow. And then I asked, well, what do you think it is? He's like, well, I think maybe it's the time of year, you know, the weather's been really nice. I'm like, yeah, it very well could be. Like, that's definitely a correlation, is the change in weather and things like that. He's like, and this is the time I started to feel a bit better or more energetic last year. I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, what about the stuff I sent you? And he's like, oh my gosh, I feel like a douche. Yeah, like when you started sending me stuff, you know, I wrote down some of the stuff he said because it was interesting to hear how it worked. He said to have someone sort of spoon feeding me something to look at. It gave me something to look at. And then he's like, I started journaling, and it's like, wow, that's cool. It seems like if a person has a potential to go into higher states of consciousness, maybe we can spark each other to do that. And he said a lot of other things too that were cool, that maybe I'll talk about when I go home, because I have the notes in my computer. But he was saying that now he's a little concerned that he's a bit high, and he's almost afraid to put on headphones and listen to music, because yeah, if we get too high, we can, I think what it is experience the whole lowering in consciousness, which is changing the relativity of consciousness, slowing it down, which speeds up the rate at which unconscious and kind of scary stuff comes up. It's like if in 2 weeks you would have had 14 scary dreams, it's like as the consciousness slows down, all those 14 scary dreams come to mind. It's hard to explain, but so I think I've shared with them some of this stuff that could slow it down, but I need to actually explore that myself, like try the branched chain amino acids. Maybe if I try it, even though I think I don't need it, I think, well, I'm not manic, I'll see the effect and see if it does something in that state and if that's good. Because if I take the branched chain amino acids, which makes dopamine unavailable to the brain, then I can just add the dopamine back in by taking tyrosine. So it's not really a big deal. It's only temporary. It's like putting the brakes on. But maybe putting the brakes on will have this relativity thing happen and make it even scarier. It's possible. So I should actually be kind of prepared before doing that, because if it's something I don't need and I do it, there's a possibility that it could make it worse. But what I want to experiment with is if I do need it. If I start to learn, okay, I can be in this higher state for a week to 10 days, but then it's good to just sort of shut it down, then maybe I don't have any scary stuff in consciousness and I can just sleep. It's hard to say. But when I was looking up resources for my brain twin, I noticed that the Spire app showed I was in focus mode for 6 minutes. So that could be a clue as to what my body naturally wants to focus on. And we thought of collecting some resources that could be cool and stuff like that. Part of getting used to the magic is realizing that it's always been this way, so it's not as exciting. And was it because of the lightning strikes that I wasn't able to get into a calm mode? Was it because of the geomagnetic storms? It's hard to say. So yeah, I wonder if I burnt out my brain a little bit, and I think it's not safe to transform, but it's also a good idea to hide the slowing down process and keep the oneness at bay. And say, thanks universe for the energy, but by taking these supplements, I'm doing a gesture to retake the reins, retake the control stick, and have the felt sense of a separate individual me again, because that is what's happening mostly in the morphogenetic field. And I might be able to change that to some extent, but it really makes people uncomfortable. Maybe they change and they don't know. I don't know how that works. But then when we all change back, they sure know that I'm now an I again. And that sucks. And make it really obvious that that's what I am. Again, as. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's all good. And it's not good to lease a car. My brain feels fragile. And I'm kind of feeling like these supplement things are just gestures of retaking control. Control is part of the ego functioning, so by doing that gesture, which isn't harmful, it's a gesture of taking control, whereas sometimes we feel like we have to do gestures of self-harm in order to take control, because the self mostly is a self-harm mechanism. It's saying terrible things to us and all day long, but the self can actually be also a control mechanism of health. So when one does a gesture of healthy control, one is also getting in touch with control. So like, say someone has a lot of self-hate all day long in sort of a regular state, and then one goes into high state where one is in flow, but then one needs to take control. When the self needs to come back online, it's going to do a gesture of the self, and an extreme one, to really slow it down fast. So here comes this gesture of self-harm, or almost ending one's life in order to slow down consciousness. It's going too fast for the circumstances. And by doing a gesture of self-harm, it's like, I'm taking back control. But then that's not good, because people say you've tried to harm yourself, that's a mental illness. But really it's a gesture of trying to bring the self back online. So when one can do these small gestures of bringing the self online with supplements, at least it's something that's not harmful, but it's still a gesture of taking control of the energy, which one can only relatively do, but at least it's a safe gesture of taking control. And when one can take control when it doesn't get too high, then taking a supplement as a gesture, almost as a placebo, as a nocebo or whatever, it's not harmful, and it's not as hard to slow down with a small gesture like a supplement. So even if it gets way too far out of hand and one's speeding too fast, one might have to take a more harmful gesture like a really strong tranquilizer to slow oneself down and get through that slowing down in consciousness process, which is like time travel. It really is, and it's uncomfortable for the body and for the mind. But by going faster in time, we do create ripples of that resonance of that morphogenetic field to make it more possible for people to go into those spaces. Possibly, like, those spaces are there, they're accessible to anyone through many different means. If someone takes a psychotropic drug, they go into these higher states, and the slowing down and coming back to the regular consensus morphogenetic field is hard for those people too. But then there's people who their brain does that without exogenous drugs and things like that. But then we can learn to take, almost like I don't want to call it psychotics, like anti-speed. Someone might take speed or ecstasy. Our brain does produce speed and does produce ecstasy without those things, but we can take things to counteract the ecstasy and the speed and the dimethyltryptamine and all that stuff that gets made by the brain to speed it up, because the brain does need to go into some of these states some of the time in order to start painting that into this reality. So yeah, if I can lay low and not overcommit myself to things like a big car, stay at home, do the brain training that I have to do for the next 50 days, go through the big crisis. Maybe it won't even happen if I'm able to keep learning to navigate and do the experiment with the branched chain amino acids, the sleep cycle app, learn about that p-test. All these things I'm learning to see if one can control one's physiology in order to be able to come up, let the energy bring oneself up, and then bring oneself back down, slow oneself back down in time more appropriately and more easily, like having the control stick. By being able to control one's physiology, not trying to control. See, the thing is, we try to control it by like, okay, I'm going to do mindfulness to control my thoughts, or I'm going to do CBT to control my thoughts, or I'm going to go do DBT to control my thoughts, or all these things. But maybe it's easier to do it physiologically and let the thoughts pass, if there are any, at certain points. Because the point of trying to control the thoughts would be to go back to regular, monotonous, everyday life. Whereas if one can get a hold of this physiologically, one could access those states, harvest them, bring it back, and then slow oneself down without freaking out and having to create some kind of lifelong ego problem out of it. When the problem is the ego, and it's not a problem at the same time. We need it, but to be able to speed up and slow down without freaking out would be good. And if I can learn that, see, I always do this. I'm like, well, I'll wait and see what happens, but there's always some other factor that comes in and trips me up, and that's fine. But at least I won't be tripped up by having some big car payment. And the thing is, too, with that is, like, a little while ago, I was telling myself, okay, save up and get some kind of like van that I can sleep in. This car, I can't sleep in. And if I want to go camp and just sleep in a van in the summer, that would be nice. So if my car dies, it might be better to just pay a couple grand for like some crappy van. So I think this isn't the right choice. I think I would love an electric car once I'm more settled in a year or so, but right now is not the right time. The right time is now, all time is now, but it's a smaller percentage of the totality of what I have access to as this brain and this existence right now. So yeah, I think I feel okay about all this. And I'm going to talk to myself later about other stuff and the astrology stuff and more experiments that I'm going to run here.